Hello everyone, I am Tacit, and today I'm going to be going over the Gems of Ord Silver Necropolis faction as of the Deep Delve variant. We're just briefly going to be going over a bunch of teams and general strategy for this place. So this is a brown-purple faction associated to that of Silverglade, which is decently relevant as Silverglade is a magic-based kingdom that as of this week, with the new troop, can now end up reaching power level 23. Which is one step closer, and if nothing else, makes it a little bit easier to end up hitting the 10 and 20 star milestones in order to get that extra magic bonus. But as far as the faction itself, it is most known for one really specific thing, and that is the weapon. This is not something I normally go over on a lot of factions. However, this is still probably one of the top 10 weapons in the game, definitely the lower top 10 these days, but it is still really good. And one of the few faction weapons I would say are pretty mandatory to get. As far as faction weapons are concerned, they come in pretty sporadically. Every single week there's an event on Tuesday that only lasts for one day, where you can end up getting a given kingdom's faction weapon. However, there are also weekend events, like right now, where for a 3-day period, you'll be able to go and do the same thing while they have like a new Deep Delve variant, all that, bring in a new troop. As you can see here, the new troop's pretty irrelevant, unfortunately. But what isn't irrelevant is the weapon. So this weapon is really good at not dying. It steals a bunch of life from the last two enemies, and that is steal, as in not only is it doing true damage to them, but you are gaining all of that life into your HP stat. So that's a lot of durability you're gaining. And then it death marks them, so that's 2 chances that they're just going to randomly die, as that amount of damage generally is not going to kill, more often than not. And on top of that, it also gains Bless, which gives it immune to near everything as far as stats effects and stuff are concerned, which makes it really bulky with how much life it already has. And this is normally combined with something like an Orb Weaver hero class, so that's stealthy, so it's even harder to end up targeting, since you end up having Bless, stealthy, all that, little super high life durability. But that's not all. On top of that, it also gets to drain some mana from the first enemy, which 3 mana might not seem like much, but it's normally enough to end up making them go down so they can't cast or have to waste a turn. But most importantly, it even has Enchant. So on top of getting Blessed, so you can't get mana drained, you're also going to be gaining 2 mana per turn, basically, until you cast this again. This actually got nerfed a little while back, a couple years ago, several years ago at this point, where it used to have 15 mana cost and was raised to 18, but this barely affected it because the amount of mana you ultimately get from Enchant is just so high that, yeah, it just gets its mana anyways, even with a 3 increase. On top of all that, while a little bit less relevant, it also has a 5 scatter damage, which means it can remove barrier from the first and second slot since it's already hitting third and fourth. Which can come into benefit occasionally if they're running like a barrier spam team. That's probably its least relevant good thing, but has a lot of things going for it. Pretty much everything synergizes into each other to make it a pretty good weapon, normally synergized with other true damage options. Most recently, if you're watching this as this came out, Tesla actually got buffed this week. So you can end up doing a Life and Death Tesla, where your Life and Death is your tank, Tesla is on your team, and, you know, just put in a bunch of mana accumulators behind it. So you can end up opting for that, as they have no mana conflict with each other. So yeah, this has so many use cases. We'll be showing one team with it, not like every single possible variant, but it's definitely a weapon you want to make sure you get. There are 2 ways that you can end up getting it as of this weekend. You can end up spending 410 gems to end up getting it from the event itself, which is these 3, which is 210, and then another 200 for 410 total. Definitely worth it. However, the alternative, if you don't have the gems, but normally you want to save this for other Soulforge stuff, but you can get it in Soulforge for the next 3 days. It's in today, tomorrow, and Sunday. Should be somewheres in all of this mess. Hello, Life and Death, there you are. But yeah, and it's even slightly cheaper. If we compare this to a normal weapon, you can see it's 50% cheaper, and it has that effect for whenever it's out. So a little bit easier to get this way if you don't mind sparing these resources instead of the 410 gems, and you'll end up getting yourself the Life and Death weapon all the same if you don't plan on just like doing the faction event. But anyways, in regard to the faction, as I mentioned, it is a brown-purple faction. It did get a Deep Delve variant as of today. As far as its normal variant, the way you normally go about it is there's a guaranteed treasure room all the way in the top right and all the way in the bottom right. And these 2, you can either rush by going down these 2 5 times and then going into them, as these normally have pretty high multipliers as well. Or you can simply just go in a multiplier order and clear out everything else. Where you clear out the 2 tier 5s, this one and this one. Then you go take these 2 side ones, checking to see if they're treasure rooms though, as some of them can be treasure rooms like this one. So then you just go and basically go here, take out these 2, take out these 2 if they're not treasure rooms, and then basically do a sweep of all your treasure rooms and just circle around. But do make sure to double check them, as they do have pretty high odds that these side rooms are, even though the only 2 guarantee ones are top right and bottom right. However, I feel like the new format isn't much of an improvement. But as far as all the improvements we've had from Deep Delve variants, this one isn't as much of an improvement, but it is still a nice improvement. So it is set up kind of similar to Hall of Guardians in a sense, except you can't go to the final room once you hit your second, so you can't do rush method. Well, you can do rush method, but it takes 4 battles instead of 3, so 1 whole additional battle. But aside from that, it's pretty much like Hall of Guardians format, with the main exception being you actually have 2 guaranteed treasure rooms while still having the 2 5 times like the normal variant of this has. The one in top left is guaranteed, and the one in bottom left is guaranteed. So basically the inverse of the other one. The other one is top right, bottom right. This one is top left, bottom left, for where the treasure rooms are that you want to delay until later. And your format of how you do this is pretty much the exact same way. You take your 2 tier 5s, as you would in a normal one. You would then check to see if either of these 2 are a treasure room. In this particular case, they are not. And then you would take them for their multiplier, and then you would take your 2 treasure rooms and then go on to the final fight. So, oddly enough, you're basically doing the same thing as the normal faction, except in inverse order and in a layout that is slightly better as far as order is concerned, but ultimately doesn't make that big of a difference. So, probably the least change between a Deep Delve variant and a non-Deep Delve variant. And of course, if you do the Deep Delve, one benefit of that, as per usual, though I don't generally advise, oh, we have to actually go into a battle. Oh no, I need a troop here. Go, have an Aberith. But yeah, oh, that's why my random team was a firebomb earlier. I was wondering, like, why on earth the other week, why one of my troops was just randomly a single firebomb? But it's because you do this to reset the thing. But anyways, you can now do the Deep Delve variant. These are generally not that worth it. You'd rather use these to get more progress into a delve rather than ever doing it. However, you can end up spending a few extra resources, most notably an extra sigil and for whatever reason, a bunch of gold, in order to go and do a Deep Delve variant. The most relevant thing about a Deep Delve variant is one of the random rooms gets replaced with a chest. Unfortunately, my treasure room got replaced. As you can see, this is a guaranteed treasure room, and this would normally also be a guaranteed treasure room, but unfortunately it got replaced with the special Deep Delve room, where you get the guaranteed gnome fight and all that. I don't know, I still wish they would have done more to the Deep Delve stuff. It's still not generally relevant enough to do. You should generally still just ignore it and just go for, you know, standard fights, get more progress. It's much better to move up 30 levels within a faction than to move up half as much by doing 1 Deep Delve and 1 normal. It's better just to do 3 normals and just get all your factions up to 500, or working towards that over time. But anyways, that's that. Overall, Deep Delves, still as useless as ever, but still a new feature nonetheless. Anyways, anything else to mention? I guess a bunch of teams. So, as far as all the teams are concerned, we have some for all level ranges. I even showed a low life and death team here. Not all the variants of it, but just one of the more standard ones. But there's plenty of things that you can end up building it into, so highly advise getting it. But let's start going over teams. We have 2 for the low level range, 2 for the mid level range, and obviously pure faction. And maybe 3 life and death in there, because it's a pretty relevant weapon. So for the low level range, you knew I had to mention, it's actually still in Soulforge this week too, if you're watching as this is coming out. Guard's Avatar is still available in Soulforge today, tomorrow, and Sunday, same as Life and Death. So might want to pick this up. It is really good for faction events where you cannot run Rowain. As I mentioned earlier, the restriction to Silver Necropolis is a brown-purple, so you do not have access to Rowain. So pretty standard. Guard's Avatar just does a bunch of damage based on his armor. You just kill it out. Leprechaun's here for mana, as it would always be. I think it's in every single one of these teams, if I'm not mistaken. It's just such a good option. And Zerquine Hadley's just here for the 50% mana star on him, and he has some pretty good cleanup, having some damage poke as well as scroll spam. And we just kind of put Abro Crystal here, because why not? You can put pretty much anything there, just make sure it doesn't really block anything. Next up we have the cheaper team. We're using Double Zachi. You can also replace out for Hero if you find you need a little bit more tankiness. Just put Hero on first slot with whatever weapon you want to run there. And basically, we're just going with Queen Zachi spam. Queen Zachi is a legend, however, she's an easy-to-obtain legend. You just throw some Chaos Shards that you're probably getting as of this event week, and just throwing it down on Stonesong Aerie, you'll eventually get a copy or multiple copies of her. And she's pretty good. She does a bunch of damage to all enemies, and if there's a storm, you can also end up getting some 5 gems, but we're mostly just using it for its AoE spam. You can end up opting for Hero in first slot and have it constantly keep shuffling on the storm if you so choose, but just constantly spamming throughout, and Leprechaun is enough. And you can just keep doing that in order to keep getting your mana. Either way, basic premise is just to keep spamming her as your AoE option. Next up, she also has a backup summon, which I did not mention. She does have, one of the reasons for running it too, is if you ever die out, particularly if you go like anything else in first slot, or even herself, actually. She's more likely to die than your hero, probably. But she has a 35% chance to end up summoning with a Harpy Mage, and that will actually give you your Storm that you need. You can't actually run Harpy Mage this week because it's a red-yellow, which you can't run in a brown-purple faction. However, you can summon it, and it'll still count, of course, and then you can have that there. It does Explosion, does a Brown Storm, kind of like a Leprechaun that does Brown Storm in a sense, just without the Empower. Pretty similar to how she functions. As far as the higher range goes, as far as the deeper battles for getting the faction done, which you might be doing, or if you're going for all rewards, I think you have to go to about 230, which I believe is buying up into about tier 3, tier 4 or so. If you bought the weapon, you should have enough sigils to end up going all the way. But anyways, it's a pretty standard Hiking Iron Gut Zolgoth team. We have everything we need for it, so might as well. Hiking Iron Gut with Thrall Leprechaun. So you just end up spamming out Thrall Leprechaun for all your mana. Hiking Iron Gut has the very high Devour chance. You end up going for the Zolgoth kills to kill everything that has immune to Devour. And that's pretty much the whole thing. And of course, as you get Devours, your attack on Hiking Iron Gut will be higher. And with that higher attack, you'll be doing more damage off the skulls from Zolgoth. And you'll have freeze from that so they don't get extra turns. As far as the lower variant, we ended up opting for a Mang Skull Spam team. So of course, still using Thrall Leprechaun. And we're doing this with Mang as Titan. Pretty flexible, but you run for Hero here, but figure just Titan. It's a lot safer and has a lot more range. Has Enrage too. A lot of different ways you can respec it depending on what you want to get out of it. Including even in this context of this team. Depending on if you want to go a little bit tankier or more mana accumulated and heavy. But basically, you just go and cast a Mang. You get a billion attack by tearing away all their armor. The deeper you go, the more attack you're getting. So you will always scale through the entire faction. There are Leprechauns still doing a standard mana accumulation. And we're using Keeper of Souls here as our Skull Spam. This is a legend that is a little bit harder to get. However, if you need alternative to Keeper of Souls, you can end up opting for a Skeleton. Skeleton's a common, you probably have it laying around. It's not good as Keeper Souls, but does have auto extra turn while creating some skulls. Biggest issue with it is that it will be a little bit more mana blocked. Not that this isn't, but it'll be a little bit harder to get it mana overall, given that you have so many purples already on the team, without having a secondary mana for it to fill into. But Skeleton would still do perfectly fine. We're mostly just focusing all around Mang and carrying through that. Next, we have the Pure Faction team. Pure Faction's very easy. We have access to Bone Golem, so Explode a Gem. Deathmark actually does nothing in this faction, oddly enough. Because, well, maybe not nothing, but the first and final battle all have immune to Deathmark. So on the battles that would probably matter most, like, the final battle, you don't have access to it. For the middle fight that you have going into it, it does do something, at least. Well, assuming Deathmark does something. But assuming Deathmark actually gets a kill, it can do something. But the first and final battle have immune to Deathmark, so the fact that he actually Deathmarks generally does not mean anything in this faction, which is slightly bad for how quickly it gets done. But it's also good because that means the enemy can't just randomly kill you out of nowhere, so overall it's more of a benefit than a downside. It does get to explode a gem, so you have some border control, but the most relevant thing here is that it gains a bunch of attack and armor. This is the combination that basically auto-wins factions. Anything that can gain attack while gaining any of the 2 durability stats tends to be nearly unkillable when it comes to faction events, when running Pure Faction, and this is no different. You can just kill it out with a single Bone Golem. If you truly want to play it safe, you could even double up on Bone Golem, just to ensure you have one Bone Golem, and double Vanya going to the final fight. But generally, your first Golem's not really going to die due to the 50% score reduction, which makes it even bulkier than normal, on top of its durability that's already gaining and its board control. So overall, yeah, pretty easy win from that. And then you just need some damage pressure. Obviously, that alone will not be all your damage pressure. You could if you wanted to. However, it is a bit quicker if you just keep throwing down AoE spam. You also gain Bless from this, so this could potentially help with some annoying stats effects. But you just keep spamming this weapon or this troop over and over again. Just standard AoE damage and just keep whittling them down. And he does get to summon a Silver Necropolis troop. And here, player gets to use summon a lot better than the enemy does overall. Mostly because the way that summoning works when you're a player is that it caps at level 20. However, for the enemy, it comes in at whatever their magic level is. So let's say, for example, they are level, well, 500, because that's probably when you'd be doing Deep Delve. And let's say their magic is like 300, as you can see. Or not, I see here, but, if we were all the way at that deep. Actually, we can kind of... Oh, no, we can't. I was going to go to that one battle there, but we're actually not deep enough to see. But anyways, it would have, like, let's say 500 magic. Or not 500, like 300 magic or so. Is about where it would be, roughly, give or take a little bit. So with 300 magic, that would end up summoning a level 300. Because it comes in at whatever their level is, or whatever their magic is. So the level 500 would then summon a level 300 or so. Then that 300 would summon like a level, like, let's say 150-ish. And it'd keep going down because it's going based on their magic level. Since they don't have like the 20 cap, it just keeps going to whatever their magic actually is, well, up to a 500 cap. And it will just keep going down as they summon over and over and over again. Whereas yours will always be just as strong. How strong as yours is initially is as strong as any of them are going to be. As you're going to have way higher magic than 20 more often than not. And yeah, you're just going to get the full amount of durability on yours, whereas the enemies comes in at a weaker state. Which is one of the main reasons why summoning in any faction tends to be better on the player side than on the enemy side. It can still be annoying on the enemy side because it takes forever to kill them, but it ultimately benefits the player more. And that gives this place basically 3 things to win with. It has the unkillable Bone Golem, or at least in theory, obviously can still die. It has a standard AoE spam, which, a lot of factions have. and it has a backup summon. So it pretty much has everything you need to go and win. Which means even if your bone golem does die, you can just resummon it. You might have to cycle back a little bit because there's 2 other summons you can also do. But eventually, 1 in 3 chance, you will get that bone golem back even if it does go down. So just triple Vanya into bone dragon. I mean, I keep saying bone dragon. I mean bone golem. I wish we could use bone dragon for it. It would make it a lot easier. Anyways, this one is not related to the faction in any way, shape, or form. However, this is a life and death team. Probably one of the more standard ones as far as how it is structured. But of course, there are plenty of ways to end up building it. But this is probably the most common one you're ever going to see. It is ran mostly for Guild War defense. And hey, it's Guild War next week, so definitely make sure to get it before then. And even if it wasn't, you still want to get it. However, pretty standard format. Basically, how this runs is you run and empower in first slot. This is pretty flexible as far as what you can do here. This one just happens to use Lamech Stew as the option. This is to make sure that you can get a bunch of mana accumulation. Normally, you do it into purple in order to be able to feed both Life and Death when Weaver. However, some teams do it directly just into Weaver, so you can get a quick Weaver kill in there by doing it into something like yellow, or something that has an empower yellow. So next we have, of course, Life and Death itself. Normally ran with Orb Weaver. This is for a couple reasons. Most notably, it has Stealthy, so any Stealthy hero class can benefit quite a bit from it. Thief is also sometimes used for that reason, depending on the team composition. But anything with Stealthy tends to be pretty good, since it can't be targeted directly. And combined with Bless, that makes it immune to a very high amount of things within the game. And one of the other things that's really relevant about it, it has a natural immune to Mana Drain, which very few heroes actually do. But it also has a 35% chance to summon a giant spider when it takes damage. And this is pretty much any type of damage. So you can constantly keep resummoning a pretty good first slot. A giant spider is a converter that converts to purple, that also has a summon, that also has a link into purple, so you get even more mana. So it even got a rework back in January, where it even does, like, I think a spider gem every single turn as well, so you can get even more webs on the enemy. But overall, it's just a really great mana accumulator. This used to be 50% back in the day, but 35% is still insanely high for this, especially since bleed, poison, stuff like that can still trigger on it, assuming you're not already blessed off of Life and Death. And of course, as we mentioned, it does all the things Life and Death would normally do. Drains first slot a little bit, has a huge life steal, which means it actually gets the life, has Enchant and Bless simultaneously, which keeps it really protected while also getting mana over time, so it's always a constant threat in the battle, and can just occasionally just get free kills off of Death Mark, if all else fails. On top of that, it's synergized most oftenly with Weaver. However, there are plenty of other synergy troops. There's Tesla, there's Scourge of Honor, there's pretty much anything that does true damage that is decent tends to get synergized, potentially with Life and Death. But Arachnian Weaver is particularly relevant due to what it hits. Life and Death hits the last 2 enemies. And of course, as many of you probably know, Weaver also hits the last 2 enemies with not just normal damage, but true damage. So they both hit the last 2 with true damage. The average battle like this tends to be Life and Death. And then you get into Weaver range. Ideally, most battles that you want to do with Life and Death Weaver to make it the most viable are battles where your Life and Death Weaver will have enough damage to cycle. So you do Life and Death, you do Weaver, it then explodes. You do Life and Death Weaver, it then explodes, and you won. That is ideally how it goes, because it webs all enemies, one of the better webbers in the entire game still to this day, deals a bunch of true damage at a higher rate than that of Life and Death. So the last 2 enemies, same targets. And if the enemy dies, it explodes a bunch of gems, so you basically get a full board clear and a bunch of mana accumulation every single time. And on top of that, guess who else has Stealthy? And Impervious, basically, because Impervious, not entirely what Bless does, but they have a lot of similar overlap as far as the overall immunities. Bless is oddly enough slightly better. However, they're both basically immune to most things, have Stealthy, and yeah, it makes them really, really hard to get rid of. So it ends up being a lot of value. And on top of that, if they do get rid of something, let's say like your first slot, which is generally the most likely thing to die, if you don't end up getting a giant spider summon, well, you're probably going to get a web spinner there, which is oddly enough also the same color, green-blue. And 75% of the times when it ends up getting a kill, or anything on your team gets a kill, there's 75% chance if you have an empty spot that will be replaced with a web spinner. Web spinner got a gigantic buff way back when. It has always had triple damage, but it used to be triple damage to poison only. But it these days has triple damage to web, but also has web on skull, meaning anything that does not have immune to web, web spinner will actually do triple damage to, making it one of the better skull spam related troops in the entire game. And you can get a lot of damage pressure there. So not only do you have super high true damage to their last line, but you'll also be summoning something that has triple damage to nearly everything in the game, or a good bulk of it, good 90% plus or so, that you just resummon in the first slot once your first slot dies. So that is huge as far as its overall value that it ends up getting. It's one of the most consistent winning troops in all of Faction, and having the Life and Death Weaver synergy works out pretty well. And lastly, this one's pretty flexible, but more commonly it is ran with King Avalon. It has a 50% mana start for all elves. This is pretty relevant because Arachnian Weaver is an elf, and guess who else is an elf? Orb Weaver. So you have a triple elf there. You could technically even make your first slot an elf, but normally it's ran for an Empower instead. But you could make it a 50% mana start elf, though in a Guild War context, this might be a little bit too slow, as Empower, Double Empower, Triple Empower are all things, so you kind of need at least one of your own to hope to hold the line. But you can just make it a 4th elf and make a pure elf team whenever you want as well, if you feel like there's a better synergy for it. But it's more commonly ran with Empower, so your entire team still has 50% mana start, and one of them just happens to have a full mana start. And that's pretty much Life and Death Weaver. Highly, highly, highly advise getting this thing. It is 100% worth doing so. But anyways, guys, hey, Trippy Trading. That'll wrap it up for the Silver Necropolis as of the Deep Delve variant. If you still have any other questions, feel free to leave it in the comment section below. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Best of luck with the event, and I will catch all of you guys later. Goodbye, everyone, and thanks for watching.